It begins quietly, not with trumpets, not with visions tearing the sky, but with a subtle restlessness you cannot explain. You wake in the middle of the night and stare at the ceiling as if it were a map, as if something beyond the plaster were calling your name. You move through your days aware that everything is somehow misaligned. You love, you work, you laugh, but under it all there is a hum, a note sustained so softly that others do not hear it, but you do. It is the sound of your origin vibrating through the fabric of your life. The Urantia teachings whisper that each soul was not born here by accident, nor is this world our final destination. We came from elsewhere, from patterns too vast for our eyes, from a source whose memory is woven into the very light of our being. We have crossed the gulf between eternity and time, and in doing so we have agreed to forget for a while. But the forgetting is never complete. There are moments when a scent, a chord of music, a shaft of sunlight ignites an ache so exquisite you cannot name it. That ache is not a flaw. It is the signature of your true home, pressing gently against the walls of your current life. Psychologists like Viktor Frankl called it the search for ultimate meaning, that inner drive that cannot be satisfied by comfort or success alone. Jung saw it as the voice of the self, the deep center that dreams you into becoming. Mystics like Rumi called it the longing for the beloved. Teresa of Avila named it the wound of love that no earthly balm can heal. Science, in its own way, has begun to circle the edges of this truth. Rupert Sheldrake speaks of morphic fields, patterns of memory that link every living being to a larger story. Quantum experiments hint that consciousness is not locked inside the brain, but moves like wind between stars. And perhaps what you feel, that indefinable nostalgia, is your consciousness brushing against its own infinite field, remembering the resonance of a place where fear cannot live and joy is not fleeting. This is the metaphysical unease that comes before awakening. It is the divine dissonance that urges you to search for something you cannot yet describe, yet somehow recognize when you touch it. The call is not a command from outside. It is the pulse of your own soul rising from within, echoing from a time before your first breath. This book is not a collection of distant theories, nor a gallery of lofty ideas for the mind to admire and forget. It is a map, yes, but a living one, drawn from the cartography of countless seekers who walked before you. Yet the journey it sketches is yours alone to take. Here you will not be asked to believe blindly, but to remember actively. Every page will be a mirror, every insight a door, every truth a seed that only you can plant in the soil of your own days. The path ahead will not merely teach you about your origin and destiny. It will invite you to walk them, to inhabit them, to become them. If you have felt this strange homesickness for a place you cannot name, if you have suspected that your life is part of a greater design hidden in plain sight, then you are already answering the call. And as you step into the first chapter, know this: the voice you hear is not coming from elsewhere. It is your own soul speaking in a language it never forgot, guiding you home through the labyrinth of this world. Chapter 1. The Invisible Architecture of the Universe. It is tempting, when we speak of the universe, to imagine only what our eyes can see: the scatter of stars in a night sky, the bright edge of the moon, the slow turn of seasons across a small blue world. Our instruments refine this vision. Telescopes peel back the veil of darkness to reveal galaxies spilling like golden dust. Spectroscopes draw rainbows out of starlight, and equations on chalkboards extend our reach beyond the edges of sight. And yet, for all this, what the Urantia revelations offer is not merely an astronomical chart, nor a catalog of celestial coordinates, but a living vision, a universe not as an accident, but as a deliberate construction, a cathedral of space and time whose stones are not rock, but relationships, whose pillars are not steel, but spirit. The master universe, as described in those pages, is no formless expanse. It is an organism with a heartbeat, a pattern with purpose, a design so vast that even eternity seems to walk through its corridors with reverence. At its center is the Isle of Paradise, the unmoving origin of all motion, the fountain from which every river of energy and love flows. Around its spiral, the 7 superuniverses, immense domains, each home to trillions of inhabited worlds, each with its own history, its own spiritual weather, its own tapestry of lives in progress. These are not scattered chaotically, but arranged with an artistry that mirrors the symmetry of a seashell or the spiral of a galaxy. The higher you ascend in awareness, the more this order becomes not just visible, but audible, like the faintest hum of music behind all motion. The harmony Pythagoras once called the music of the spheres. This was no poetic whim. For the ancient mind, number, form, and harmony were the fingerprints of the divine, and the cosmos was a temple whose proportions could be read and sung. In this architecture, every level of creation is inhabited, administered, and nurtured by orders of beings whose names sound, to the modern ear, like myths, but whose functions are as practical as the beating of a heart. The Melchizedeks, wise and adaptive, guardians of spiritual education, roam where their counsel is most needed, acting as physicians of civilizations. The Michael sons, sovereign creators of local universes, reign not from distant thrones, but from the intimacy of experience, for they earn their authority by walking among their creations in mortal form, as Jesus of Nazareth did here. The adjusters of thought, mysterious fragments of the infinite Father, dwell silently in the sanctuaries of mind, shaping the soul's eternal identity in ways that no mortal eye can see. Even at the most abstract scale, the structure of the universe is relational. Beings serving beings, light guiding light, authority exercised as care. To perceive this order is to be drawn into a different kind of knowledge, not the dry recitation of facts, but the slow, deep recognition that existence is neither arbitrary nor hostile. Modern psychology would call this the need for coherence, the human hunger to feel part of something intelligible and trustworthy. When we view the universe as blind mechanism, life feels like a fight against entropy. But when we see it as an intelligent whole, patterned and purposed, we relax into a larger rhythm. The transpersonal psychologists sense this, that mental health is not merely freedom from dysfunction, but the lived conviction that one belongs to something vast and meaningful. Gustav Fechner, largely forgotten today, spoke of the anima mundi, the world soul, in which each star and planet is a living organ of the cosmic body. Charles Leadbeater envisioned spiritual hierarchies as rivers of consciousness flowing from the highest levels of being to the humblest, linking the destinies of galaxies with the beating of a sparrow's heart. Even the crude medieval maps of the cosmos, with their concentric rings of Earth, heaven, and hell, hinted at this truth. Their cartographers had never seen a nebula through glass, but they understood symbol, the layering of creation, the center from which all circles spread, the outer boundaries where the known meets the mystery. These maps were not scientific in a modern sense, but they were accurate in a deeper way. They told the soul that it was at home in a universe of structure, not adrift in a void. The Urantia cosmology affirms this, giving the skeleton of fact to the flesh of ancient intuition. And yet, to study the plan is not enough. The architecture of the master universe is not a static diagram to be admired from afar. It is a space in which you live, move, and have your being. It is the city through which your soul will walk for ages, the network of roads and gates you will traverse on a long ascent toward the center. Knowing that the super-universes are real is like knowing the streets of your hometown exist. It only matters when you begin to walk them. The Urantia teachings are not an invitation to gaze up at an unreachable sky, but to recognize that the same intelligence that orders the stars orders the cells in your body, the moments in your life, the encounters that shape your soul. This is why the old philosophers spoke of the cosmos as a mirror. As above, so below was not merely a maxim of magicians, but an observation that the laws of the greater world echo in the smaller. The structure of the universe is imprinted in the structure of the self. To know one is to begin to know the other. When you discover the patience of the Melchizedeks in your own acts of teaching, the courage of the Michael's sons in your willingness to love without control, the quiet persistence of the adjuster in your moments of integrity, you begin to realize that you are not just living in the universe. The universe is living in you. And so, as we prepare to leave the vast atrium of cosmic design and step into the narrower halls of individual life, we must carry with us this understanding, that the descent into matter, into the smallness of a single human story, does not erase the grandeur of the whole. It concentrates it. A seed is smaller than the tree, but it holds its entire pattern within. You are such a seed, a condensation of the architecture of the universe into the architecture of a soul. The journey ahead will not abandon the stars. It will bring them into the chambers of your own heart. Chapter 2, The Descent from the Stars, the Soul's Journey into Matter. Before you were an infant wrapped in blankets, before you had a name or a heartbeat in the world of men, you existed. Not as a faint premonition, not as a possibility in someone's dream, but as a reality already known in the registers of eternity. The Urantia revelation tells us that the soul begins in realms beyond space-time, not in the cold machinery of abstract law, but in the warmth of relationship with the source. There, in the higher orders of being, identity is not earned by deeds but bestowed as birthright. Awareness is not filtered through fragile senses, but streams unbroken from the infinite. And yet, for reasons as deep as the foundations of reality itself, each soul is called to take a long, spiraling road downward into the dense gravity of matter. It is tempting to see this descent as a fall, a loss, an exile from the luminous homeland of the spirit. Many traditions have painted it this way, the soul as a prisoner in flesh, longing for release. But in the cosmology of Urantia, incarnation is not banishment, it is apprenticeship. Just as an artist must one day leave the gallery and step into the dust and noise of the marketplace to learn how beauty survives in the chaos, so the soul must enter the narrow corridors of a mortal life to discover how divinity breathes in limitation. In the Kabbalah, the soul is spoken of in layers: nefesh, ruach, neshama, each descending like a spark wrapping itself in veils, not to extinguish its light, but to preserve it until the time is right to flare. In this way, you did not simply appear here. You volunteered for the work of becoming whole under conditions where wholeness can be forgotten. The forgetting is not a cruelty. It is the first tool in the great classroom of matter. Without it, you would move through life with no reason to seek, no hunger to question, no courage to leap into the dark. Amram Mikhail Ivanov, a teacher whose insights remain hidden from the noise of popular spirituality, described this world as a school where the lessons are written into the fabric of every day, and where the final exam is always the same. Did you learn to love? Joseph Campbell's great hero's journey is a mirror of this path. There is the call to adventure, the soul's decision to enter form, the crossing of the threshold, the shock of birth, the trials and temptations, the endless weaving of joy and pain, gain and loss, and finally, the return, not to the same realm you left, but to a higher octave of the same music, carrying with you the strength, the empathy, the wisdom you forged here. Many indigenous peoples have preserved, without dilution, the poetry of this truth. The Maori tell of souls diving into the dream of life, leaving the wide waters of the spirit world to swim through the narrow channels of human days. Certain North American tribes speak of stars as the ancestors, each soul having once shone above before stepping down into the long apprenticeship of flesh. These stories are not quaint metaphors. They're memories speaking in myth. The soul does not enter matter as an outsider, but as a seed enters soil, not to lose itself, but to take root, to transform what is hidden within into something that can feed the world. When you begin to see your own life in this light, the texture of every moment changes. The joys are not random accidents of fortune. They are glimpses of your original home breaking through the veil. The sorrows are not meaningless afflictions. They are chisels in the hands of a master sculptor, removing the marble that hides your true form. The people you meet are not simply companions or strangers. They are fellow travelers in the same grand descent, each with their own fragment of the original fire to guard. Even the choices you regret are not wasted. They become the darker threads in the tapestry, giving depth to the light. And in this descent, you are never truly alone. The architecture we traced in the previous chapter is not a remote scaffolding in some unreachable sky. It is alive within you. The patterns of the master universe are echoed in the patterns of your own growth. The same circuits that bind worlds to their centers bind you to your source. To walk in matter with this awareness is to carry a compass that always points home, even when you cannot see the stars. And as we will soon see, this descent into form is not a peaceful drift. There are currents that pull toward forgetting, toward fragmentation, toward rebellion against the very love that sustains us. The next chapter will take us into that territory, into the ancient and ongoing war between light and shadow, not as a distant myth, but as the most intimate battlefield of your own soul. Chapter 3, The Invisible War, Light, Shadow, and Choice. The descent into matter is never a neutral voyage. The moment the soul accepts the narrowing of form, it steps onto a stage where forces older than the stars contend for its allegiance. Urantia names one such ancient drama, the Lucifer Rebellion, a fracture in the harmony of the universe, born not from ignorance but from brilliance turned inward. It was the rebellion of a being entrusted with vast authority, who came to believe that the currents of divine order were a limitation to be escaped rather than a life-giving stream to be embraced. His manifesto was seductive: freedom without responsibility, sovereignty without communion, self-exaltation without the grounding of love. And while this drama unfolded in celestial corridors far beyond the reach of human eyes, its reverberations passed into the fabric of worlds like ours, worlds still learning to anchor themselves in light. We feel those reverberations not as thrones toppling or stars dimming, but as the quiet tremor in our own hearts when we are tempted to turn entirely inward, cutting ourselves off from the living web that holds us. Jung would call it the whisper of the shadow, not merely the repository of shame and vice, but the vault where we lock away our own forgotten strength, our unclaimed compassion, our unacknowledged longing for God. To integrate the shadow is not to justify its distortions, but to rescue what is true from what is twisted, to gather the fragments back into the whole. The existentialists, Sartre among them, reminded us that freedom is the one gift we cannot refuse, and with it comes the burden of choice. We cannot hide forever behind the veil of circumstance. Eventually, we must decide what kind of beings we will become. Will we align ourselves with the gravity of love, or drift into the cold vacuum of isolation? Across the tapestry of world myth, the same story repeats in countless forms. Prometheus steals fire from the gods, an act of rebellion that brings both light and suffering. In Hindu cosmology, the Asuras rise against the Devas, cycling endlessly between defiance and defeat. In the Polynesian islands, Maui bends divine law to help humanity, blurring the line between heroism and hubris. These echoes suggest that the Urantian account is not an isolated narrative, but an archetype embedded in the collective memory of our species. The moment when part of the whole chooses separation, and the whole responds with the slow, patient work of restoration. The battlefield is not a plain of dust under alien skies, but the inner terrain of every soul, where every decision for love or fear tilts the balance one way or the other. Here, the war is fought in the smallest of choices, in the breath before you speak, in the split second between injury and forgiveness, in the quiet resolve to stay present when you wish to turn away. Defiance does not always roar. Sometimes it sighs with indifference. Loyalty to the light does not always shine. Sometimes it endures in silence. To live consciously in this field of tension is to see that victory is not the annihilation of darkness, but its illumination, the moment when the shadow is neither denied nor obeyed, but invited back into its rightful place as servant of the whole. This is the work of every seeker, to become a meeting point where the fracture begins to heal, where rebellion loses its grip not by force, but by the irresistible pull of integration. And this is where the invisible war touches the very heart of transformation. For the same currents that once carried a being of light in his self-worship run through the human condition, and the same forces that move to heal that rupture move now within us. The adjuster, silent and steadfast, waits for the moment when your will inclines toward truth, ready to weave that moment into the eternal fabric. The guardians of the light, whose existence we have yet to explore, lean close when your choice falters, not to decide for you, but to remind you of who you are. And so, the next movement of our journey will lead us deeper into this companionship, into the mystery of the divine presence within, the God who does not hover above the battle, but walks beside you in it, shaping every choice into a step toward home. Chapter 4. The Thought Adjuster, the God who dwells within you. There is a silence so deep within you that the noise of the world cannot reach it. A chamber untouched by the hands of time, where the most intimate presence you will ever encounter waits without impatience. Urantia calls this presence the Thought Adjuster, a fragment of the infinite Father, entrusted to dwell within the depths of your being. It is not a symbol, nor an allegory to soothe the mind. It is a living reality, as luminous as the stars, and yet so quiet that only the most attentive heart will ever hear its voice. It does not command, for compulsion is foreign to its nature. It does not bargain, for it has nothing to gain but you. It simply abides, waiting for the moment when your will turns toward the light, ready to meet you with a love that has been there since before your first breath. This divine companion is not here to remove your trials, but to walk through them with you, to shape your soul with the precision of an artist who sees the masterpiece hidden in the raw marble. Carl Rogers spoke of the self striving toward actualization, and Maslow of the innate drive toward the highest expression of our humanity. Neither gave the name Urantia does, but both felt the same truth. There's an inner axis around which all growth turns, a center of guidance that is at once wholly you and yet infinitely greater than you. The mystics of every age sought it in their own ways. The Hesychasts sat in stillness, letting the rhythm of the Jesus prayer align their heartbeat with the pulse of the divine. The Sufis, turning in remembrance, let the repetition of God's name dissolve every barrier between seeker and sought. Eknathis were untaught that meditation is not escape but dialogue, a conversation where the words fall away and only presence remains. Even science, cautious as it is, edges toward this mystery. Neuroimaging reveals that deep contemplation fosters coherence between disparate regions of the brain, as though the mind itself remembers its unity under the influence of something beyond it. The adjuster works in such hidden alignments, in the sudden clarity that reframes an old wound, in the inexplicable peace that steadies you when there is no reason for calm, in the pull toward compassion when resentment would be easier. These are not accidents of mood. They are the fingerprints of a guidance so gentle it would never violate your freedom, yet so persistent it will never leave you entirely to yourself. To recognize the adjuster is not to hear a voice dictating your steps, but to live in such a way that you become fluent in its language. It is the art of noticing when an idea feels like it has been waiting for you rather than arising from you. It is the discipline of shaping your thoughts, words, and actions in harmony with truth, so that the adjuster's pattern slowly becomes your own. Over time, the dialogue changes. It becomes less about asking for answers and more about walking in shared being, where the question itself is transformed by the presence that holds it. The God you once imagined distant and enthroned reveals himself as the quiet companion of every breath, the co-creator of your destiny, the one who will one day fuse with your very soul in an eternal union beyond anything flesh can imagine. And it is here, in this intimacy, that the next step of our journey unfolds. For if the adjuster is the silent architect of your transformation, there are also forces and structures through which creation shapes itself more visibly. Laws of vibration, the creative force of the spoken word, and the power of consciousness to mold the very fabric of reality. It is to this hidden science, both ancient and ever new, that we now turn. Chapter 5, The Hidden Science of the Word. If the thought adjuster is the silent architect shaping the foundations of your soul, then the word is the chisel in your own hands, the instrument through which you, too, participate in creation. The Urantia teachings remind us that consciousness is not a passive observer of reality, but a co-author of its unfolding. To speak is not merely to describe. It is to summon, to give form to the formless. Long before science traced the neurological pathways by which language reshapes the brain, the sages knew that the spoken word carried the weight of worlds. Paracelsus understood it when he called words living medicines or poisons, each syllable an alchemical tincture capable of healing or harming, of awakening or wounding the soul. In the Hermetic tradition, the logos is not an idea, but the primal vibration that calls the cosmos into being, the first breath from which galaxies spiral into existence. The ancients guarded this knowledge as one guards fire in the dark. They spoke blessings with reverence and curses with caution, knowing that the echo of a word does not vanish when the voice falls silent, but travels through the invisible architecture of reality, imprinting itself upon matter and mind alike. Eliphas Levi called it the magical chain, the unbroken link between thought, sound, and manifestation. Hazrat Inayat Khan taught that sound itself is the soul's first movement toward expression, and that all creation is, at its root, crystallized sound. In the East, the science of mantra was born from this truth, the repeated sound that shapes the inner landscape until it vibrates in unison with the eternal. In the West, sacred decrees and invocations carried the same principle, though cloaked in the robes of theology. Today, neuroscience affirms what mystics and magi intuited, that words, especially when repeated with focus and emotion, can carve new neural pathways, altering the architecture of perception and behavior. Even the silent experiments of cymatics, where sound waves inscribe perfect geometric forms into sand or water, reveal in miniature what the spoken word does in the unseen. A tone is uttered, and chaos organizes into pattern. A sentence is spoken, and reality bends subtly toward its image. To understand this is to stand in awe before your own mouth, for the breath that carries your words is the same breath that animates your life. Every conversation, every whisper in the dark, every thought you give the dignity of sound becomes a seed. The question is not whether your words have power, but whether you wield them with intention. To practice the hidden science of the word is to become a conscious gardener of reality, planting what you wish to harvest and refusing to sow what you would not want to see grow. The masters speak slowly because they know that language is a tool that can build temples or topple them. The mystics choose silence when words would fall short, trusting that sometimes the absence of sound speaks more clearly than its presence. To live in this awareness is to weigh each utterance as a stone placed in the structure of your own destiny. The Urantian vision of a responsive cosmos meets the hermetic art of vibration here, fusing into a practice both mystical and practical. When your speech aligns with truth, compassion, and vision, the universe itself becomes an ally in bringing your words to life. And as our journey continues, we will step from this realm of vibration into the very blueprint of creation, where numbers and patterns reveal the hidden symmetry between the body, the soul, and the stars themselves. Chapter 6: Sacred Geometry and the Architecture of the Soul. If the word is the vibration that calls form into being, then sacred geometry is the form that vibration inevitably takes, the visible signature of the invisible song. Urantia's revelations hint that creation is no accident of chaos tamed by chance, but the unfolding of a deliberate pattern, a divine mathematics woven into the fabric of existence before time itself began. The same spirals that unfurl through the arms of galaxies curve within the hidden chambers of seashells. The same golden ratio that dictates the orbits of planets also shapes the petals of a rose and the proportions of the human body. These patterns are not ornaments. They're the language in which the infinite speaks to the finite, the grammar of form through which the mind of God is made visible. The ancients recognized this truth instinctively. In their temples, they built according to proportions that mirrored the vault of the sky, so that the very stones became instruments resonating with cosmic harmony. In illuminated manuscripts, they embedded circles, triangles, and spirals as silent codes for those with eyes to see. Keith Critchlow called geometry the meeting place of science and art, where number and beauty converge to reveal unity. In the psyche, these shapes are more than pleasing designs. They are archetypes lodged deep within the collective unconscious. Carl Jung understood that the circle speaks of wholeness because it mirrors the completeness of the self, the triangle of aspiration because it reflects the soul's climb toward higher realms, the spiral of evolution because it echoes the soul's eternal unfolding toward its source. In mystical traditions, these forms are not metaphors but instruments. To meditate upon a mandala is not to contemplate decoration, but to align the mind with the structure of the cosmos. The phrase, "as above, so below," ceases to be poetic when one realizes that the same ratios found in the vastness of nebulae live in the curve of a fingerprint. The golden ratio, phi, is not simply a number. It is a rhythm the soul recognizes, a proportion that soothes the spirit because it whispers of home. Even in the seemingly disparate realms of astronomy and biology, the recurrence of these geometries reveals an underlying unity, as if every star and every cell were following the same hidden blueprint. To live in harmony with sacred geometry is to allow these patterns to reassert themselves in your body, your mind, and your spirit. The Urantian vision speaks of spiritual circuits, channels through which divine energy flows, maintaining the symmetry between mind and soul. The mystics intuited this long before the diagrams were drawn. They moved their bodies in prayerful postures that traced geometric forms in space, breathed in rhythms that mirrored natural cycles, and designed places of worship whose walls themselves sang with proportion. Even the act of visualizing oneself encircled by light, or walking the winding path of a labyrinth, is an invocation of these universal patterns, a way of tuning one's being to the frequency of the Creator. In the architecture of the universe, the great arches of galaxies lift our gaze toward infinity. In the architecture of soul, the same proportions lift our hearts toward their source. And when the soul remembers this geometry, something within settles into place. The chaos of thought quiets. The scattered fragments of identity begin to cohere. We recognize ourselves as living temples, each proportioned according to the same divine mathematics that holds the stars in their orbits. And from this place of alignment, we are ready to enter the next stage of our journey, the psychology of awakening, where the patterns of the cosmos begin to break open the patterns of the self, and the geometry of the outer world becomes the architecture of an inner transformation. Chapter 7. The Psychology of Awakening. When the hidden architecture of the soul begins to realign with the proportions of the cosmos, something subtle yet unstoppable stirs within. It is not always a gentle dawn. More often, it feels like the cracking of ice after a long winter, sharp, disruptive, echoing deep into the inner chambers. Awakening is rarely a single moment. It is a series of quiet tremors and sudden quakes that together dismantle the familiar scaffolding of the self. The Urantian teachings describe this as the gradual yielding of the animal mind to the higher circuits of the spirit. A transformation not of belief alone, but of perception, desire, and will. It is the slow emergence of the soul's original blueprint from beneath the layers of instinct and conditioning that have kept it dormant. Psychologists have tried to chart this journey. Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development map the movement from fear-driven obedience to action guided by internalized principle. James Fowler traced faith's evolution from unquestioned acceptance of external authority to an inner knowing that cannot be shaken by circumstance. The Stoics prepared for awakening by stripping away the illusions that bind the heart to what is impermanent. The Epicureans sought freedom from fear and the tyranny of unnecessary desire, creating space for the soul to breathe. These traditions, in their own language, recognized what Urantia affirms, that awakening is not merely about knowing truth, but becoming capable of living it. Roberto Assagioli, in his vision of psychosynthesis, saw the self not as something to be destroyed, but as an orchestra in need of a conductor, the soul, who could integrate every instrument into a harmonious whole. Awakening, then, is not the annihilation of personality, but its recentering around a higher axis. Yet this process is rarely serene. Stanislav Grof's studies of spiritual emergencies reveal that when the boundaries between the conscious and unconscious, the temporal and the eternal, thin too quickly, the human vessel can feel overwhelmed. Visions may pour in unbidden. Old wounds may surface as if demanding to be healed in the light of a new consciousness. Without guidance, such experiences can spiral into confusion. With guidance, they become thresholds, gateways into deeper integration. To awaken is to enter a dialogue with one's own resistance. The parts of us that have survived by clinging to familiar structures will fight to keep them intact. The mind will call the unknown dangerous. The body will react to stillness as if it were threat. But the geometry we carry, the cosmic symmetry restored in the last stage of the journey, begins to exert its quiet pull, reminding us that the soul was not built for stagnation. Each challenge, each moment of inner conflict is the friction that allows transformation to spark. The crises that seem to threaten our stability are often the very conditions in which the deeper stability of the soul is forged. This is why awakening is as much about patience as it is about courage. The mind, like a pupil learning a new rhythm, will falter, rush, or resist before it learns to move in time with the music of the higher self. And yet, with each act of surrender to truth, each refusal to return to smaller versions of ourselves, we strengthen the connection to the adjuster within, the fragment of the infinite shaping us from the inside. Over time, the old scaffolding collapses not into ruin, but into open space, the space where the next stage of the journey can unfold. And it is in this open space that we begin to sense that we are not walking alone, that forces unseen have always been at work beside us, guiding, protecting, and reminding us of the way forward. Chapter 8. The Invisible Guardians. The open space left after awakening is never empty. As the old scaffolding of the self falls away, a strange awareness begins to grow, the feeling of being accompanied. It is not always dramatic. Often it is subtle, like walking down a quiet street and realizing you have been matched step for step by someone you cannot see. In the Urantian vision, these companions are not abstractions, but a vast and organized order of beings, seraphim, midwayers, planetary helpers, celestial instructors. They do not intrude. They do not override. They walk in that mysterious balance between protection and permission, watching the road ahead while allowing us to stumble just enough to learn the weight of our own steps. Psychology would call them the archetype of the helper, the wise companion who appears in every hero's journey. They are the stranger at the threshold offering guidance, the mentor who vanishes once the student is ready to stand alone. Jung understood this figure as something more than literary device. He saw it as an image encoded in the collective unconscious, a recognition of an ancient truth the soul never forgets, that it is never truly alone. Whether they come as a sudden thought that shifts your decision, a dream that lingers like a warning, or the unexplainable sense that something stopped you just in time, their language is one of quiet intervention. Mystics across cultures have spoken of them with an intimacy that defies dogma. In Sufi tradition, they're the subtle presences moving like a breeze around the heart, steering the inner compass toward God. In Christian mysticism, they range from the awe-inspiring visions of radiant beings, as with Teresa of Avila's burning angel, to the gentlest nudge toward patience when impatience threatens love. The Zoroastrians knew them as the Amshah Spentas, eternal spirits whose very existence upholds the moral architecture of the cosmos. Dora van Gelder-Koens, with her clairvoyant perception, described them as patterns of living light, each with a distinct texture of intelligence and care, Their presence felt more than seen, like the gravity that holds us without our noticing. History leaves its traces of their work. There are accounts of soldiers inexplicably spared in battle, travelers led to safety by a mysterious figure who disappears without farewell, healers who feel a second pair of hands guiding theirs. Yet these moments are rarely meant as proof. They're personal signatures, reminders for the one touched that their journey is seen and valued. The Urantian text suggests that their help is most active when our will aligns with the higher currents of truth and service. They will not prevent every hardship, for hardship often shapes the soul's deepest strengths, but they will ensure that the lesson does not shatter the learner. Over time, a relationship with these guardians becomes less about asking for rescue and more about living in such a way that their guidance can flow unobstructed. We begin to sense their quiet approval in moments of integrity, their gentle warnings in moments of drift. And as the journey deepens, the awareness of their presence changes something fundamental. The road no longer feels like a lonely path through an indifferent world. It feels like a pilgrimage watched over by unseen companions who have been with us since before we could name them. And it is under their silent watch that we begin to perceive another truth, that they walk with us not only to protect, but to prepare us for the vastness of the reality to which we are returning, a reality where time itself loosens its hold and eternity begins to press in from the edges of every moment. Chapter 9, Time and Eternity, Living Between Two Worlds. It begins as a shift so subtle you almost miss it, a loosening in the grip of the clock, a strange sense that the hours are not as fixed as they once seemed. Perhaps it happens while watching the sun dissolve into the horizon, when minutes stretch into an immeasurable stillness. Perhaps it comes in the middle of the night, when the world is silent and you feel suspended between one heartbeat and the next. The guardians, if you have learned to notice them, seem quieter in these moments, as if stepping back to let you sense something greater, the thin membrane between time and eternity. In the Urantian vision, time is not the ultimate reality, but a teaching device, a scaffolding built to support beings in the process of becoming eternal. It is the means by which growth is measured, experiences are sequenced, and choices are given weight. To the infinite, all moments exist complete, like a vast mural already painted. But to us, moving through the corridors of time is like walking the length of that mural with a lantern, seeing only one section at a time. The illusion of past and future gives meaning to the present, for it allows us to choose, to commit, to learn. The saints and sages have always hinted at this, though their metaphors differ. Augustine confessed that he could not define time, though he felt its press as intimately as breath. The mystics spoke of the eternal now, not a point on a line, but the ground on which the line itself rests. Psychology's gentler voices have tried to lead us back to that ground through practices of mindfulness, inviting us to inhabit each moment fully, neither chasing the future nor clinging to the past. Jean Gebser envisioned an evolution of consciousness in which time would become transparent, revealing eternity woven into every instant. In this state, the present is no longer a fleeting edge between what was and what will be, but a portal into a dimension where all is already whole. The Sufis, turning in the dance of remembrance, enter this space when the rhythm dissolves their sense of before and after. The hesychasts touch it in the silence between breaths. In these moments, the clock may still tick, but its sound becomes part of a deeper rhythm, one that is not counted, but known. Modern physics has dared to echo these ancient intuitions. The block universe model suggests that past, present, and future coexist, and that our sense of moving through them is a function of perception, not the nature of reality itself. If this is true, then we are not travelers racing toward a distant shore, but divers exploring different depths of the same ocean. Time, from this view, is not an arrow but a landscape, and eternity is the terrain in which that landscape is carved. To live with this awareness is to loosen the fear of loss, for nothing truly vanishes. It simply shifts position in the eternal whole. It is to act without the panic of scarcity, to love without the shadow of a ticking clock, to work without the desperation of running out of days. Between these two worlds, the wise learn to move as translators, speaking the language of time in service of eternity, shaping the hours with the weight of what is timeless. Chapter 10: The Inner Kingdom and the Transformation of the World. When you begin to see time through the lens of eternity, the center of gravity shifts inward. The world outside may still whirl in its noise and haste, but the true axis of your being no longer spins with it. You discover, as the Urantian teachings affirm, that the kingdom of God is not a realm to be reached by crossing borders or climbing ladders of power. It is a reality established in the deepest chambers of the heart. The shift is subtle at first, like finding an untouched spring in a desert. You drink, and for a moment the thirst that has driven so much of your life quiets. But then you realize this spring is not a place you visit. It is a place you carry. To enter this kingdom is to consent to a reversal of priorities. Power no longer looks like control over others, but mastery over oneself. Wealth no longer means the accumulation of possessions, but the capacity to give without fear. Influence no longer comes from the volume of your voice, but from the clarity of your presence. And here lies the paradox. When the inner life is transformed, the outer world inevitably shifts. Social psychology confirms what prophets and poets have long known. The state of an individual's inner world shapes the collective atmosphere. A mind ruled by suspicion will, in time, weave communities bound by fear. A heart at peace will plant seeds of harmony that grow in unseen ways. History is studded with quiet revolutions born from such awakenings. The movements that truly alter the moral current of humanity often begin with one person who has allowed the inner kingdom to take root and bear fruit. Their actions may seem small in the moment. An act of forgiveness where revenge was expected, a gesture of compassion toward the forgotten, a refusal to compromise truth even when it costs dearly. But like seeds caught by the wind, these acts take root in places the sower may never see. Peter Dinov spoke of a white brotherhood, not bound by race or creed, but by the light of love, whose members work silently in all corners of the world, tending to the soil of human consciousness. They do not seek recognition. They seek alignment with the higher order, knowing that the most enduring revolutions are sown in the hidden gardens of the soul. The transformation of the world is never achieved by force alone. Empires can be built and toppled by armies, but the spirit of a people changes only when the inner soil is made ready. To live in the inner kingdom is to become part of this quiet alchemy. You walk into rooms and shift the air, not because you impose, but because you carry a presence that speaks of something more enduring than the walls around you. You make choices with an awareness that each is a thread in the vast tapestry of cosmic responsibility. And in time, others begin to feel it, the subtle invitation to remember their own spring, their own hidden kingdom. The boundaries of this realm expand with every soul that chooses truth over deceit, compassion over cruelty, courage over apathy. In this way, the inner kingdom is not a retreat from the world, but its transformation from within, a revolution without banners, a conquest without swords, an empire whose only borders are the limits of human awakening. Epilogue: the inheritance of the stars. There comes a point when you understand that the inner kingdom you have tended is not yours alone. It belongs to the same vast story that began before the first star flared in the darkness, the same current that carried you into this life and will carry you beyond it. The Urantian vision gathers all the threads here. You are not an accident of biology, nor a fleeting spark in a cold, indifferent cosmos. You are a child of eternity, conceived in the mind of God, sent into the corridors of time not as an exile, but as an emissary. We began as luminous fragments, flung from the central fire into the adventure of becoming. We clothed ourselves in matter, learned the weight of limitation and the taste of longing, walked through shadow and light until our steps grew steady. And now, at the threshold of return, we see that nothing was wasted. Not the joy, not the pain, not even the waiting. Every moment was a brushstroke on an eternal canvas, shaping us into beings capable of conscious union with the source. Nietzsche once wrote that life should be lived as a work of art, chiseling away all that is false until only the essential remains. Berdyaev saw the same truth in the language of freedom, that creation itself is God's invitation to co-author reality with him. Psychology mirrors this in its highest vision of self-actualization, the soul fulfilled not by hoarding experience, but by pouring itself into service. The mystics name it as the Great Fusion, the point where the self and the divine indwelling are no longer two, but one. In that union, individuality is not erased. It is transfigured, becoming the unique and unrepeatable note in the eternal symphony. This is the inheritance of the stars, to live as one who knows where they have come from, why they are here, and where they are going. It is not a crown handed down, but a mantle assumed. The decision to embody what you have learned, to guard the wisdom entrusted to you, and to shine in places where the dawn has not yet broken. The cosmos is incomplete without your thread in its fabric, your voice in its chorus, your courage in its unfolding story. So walk on, not with the burden of obligation, but with the joy of one who has finally remembered their true address in the universe. You are dust and divinity, traveler and homecoming, keeper of a flame that was never meant to be hidden. Carry it well, for there are those still wandering in the night who will find their way by your light. And when you lift your eyes to the sky, know that it is not looking down upon you. It is looking back, recognizing its own. And if you enjoyed this content, please comment where you're from, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel. Every day we bring new videos to nourish the soul. Gratitude. And if you enjoyed this content, please comment where you're from, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel. Every day we bring new videos to nourish the soul. Gratitude.